Head over to the 6 counties, and we speak with Andy Martin. He's with the 32 County Sovereignty Committee. He organized a protest at the Irish News, which is the biggest nationalist newspaper in the 6 counties. Andy, maybe you can explain, why were you protesting at the Irish News in Belfast today?
Well, John, more or less, the Irish News has been running very recently with what we believe in the sovereignty movement to be a criminalisation policy. That is regurgitating stuff that they've got from the British security services, MI5, etc., which basically paints Republicans who are opposed to the Good Friday Agreement, Republican separatists, is painting them more or less as nothing more than criminals. It's a regurgitation again of the old British policy in Ireland, which is normalisation and criminalisation and ulsterisation. That's basically what they're at the minute. The Irish News has been printing some pretty outlandish claims to do with Republican groupings.
Well, maybe, Andy, you can give us a few examples, because there are some very bizarre statements about loyalist drug gangs.
Well, the most recent story was about an armed organisation, a Republican organisation, who the Irish News called the Real IRA, basically stating they have been importing weapons with the help of renegade loyalists and drug dealers. Now, not any Republicans believe that, to be honest with you. Certainly nobody I've spoken to from any of the Republican groupings, including most people who spoke to from Provisional Sinn Féin, don't believe it. What we fear that it's doing is setting a climate of criminalisation, and what we believe that is about to happen is a big crackdown on Republicans that don't agree with the Good Friday Agreement, particularly in advance of the evolution of police justice powers to the 6 county executive. So what we believe that they're at is trying to create a climate whereby they can come in turn, Republicans, use existing terror legislation that they're using over in England at the minute, which they're basically interning young Muslim men over there indefinitely without charge. We believe that in this climate they can take that over to Ireland. They can throw X amount of political activists in jail, and because of the public perception will be that these people are just criminals, they're interested in self-gain, they're not ideologically motivated, they're dealing with loyalists, they're dealing with drug dealers, that nobody raise an eyelid. And the last for criminal people internment, we had the likes of March that ended up in Bloody Sunday. You had thousands in the street. This time round, they're hoping there won't be a whimper. And I think it's no accident that these sort of stories have been coming out since recently. MI5 have taken over security in the north from the police, from the RUC. So I think it's all linked in together. I'm pretty sure that that's the case.
Now, Andy, have you issued any statements of denial to the Irish News, and have they printed any?
Well, not denial as such. I mean, we can't speak for the organisation named, obviously. We think it's an attack on Republicans in general. Now, from within Republicanism, it's pretty clear that that's not true. We have issued a statement saying that we didn't believe it was true, stating why we believed it to be the case, why it was happening, more or less the same reasons that I've given to you. I mean, they're quoting sources, but they're not elaborating. They never contacted anybody within the Republican movement to ask whether or not this story was true before they printed it. They printed it as if it was fact. And then when there were statements issued after that, I was actually talking to the journalist who had written the story. I gave her a verbal statement stating why we believed that sort of story was coming through, the sources we believed it was coming from, and that we didn't think it was credible to use sources, but not, obviously they can't name their sources, so that absolves them. They're in the position where they don't have to prove anything they write, and it's hard to disprove. Of course, that lady said then that statement would be in the paper. It didn't go in the paper. We contacted the editor then, asking for a right to reply from our perspective as Republicans. We believe that sort of stories are to damage Republicanism in general, not just the group that was named. Because throughout Ireland, there's other Republican groupings that have been, victims of similar outlandish claims. And it's to destroy the whole Republican base. The editor didn't print. What he did do the next day was in his editorial reiterate the story as if it was truth.
Now, how many people were at this demonstration today, and do you think the Irish News will cover it?
I wouldn't think the Irish News was closed when we got there. Apparently, the RUC had been in to see them during the week, telling them that they were advising them on security, etc. And they probably thought the buildings were going to get taken over or something. something like that. So the Irish News probably won't cover it. They'll put their head in the sand. There was a number of different photographers and stuff there. So I'm sure there's probably about 50 to 60. It was only small, but bearing in mind it's only a small building, It wasn't about a numbers game. It was basically about making the point. They put out a story as it was fact. They didn't report anybody saying that the story was rubbish. So we felt they had to be challenged. So we put feet on the street in front of it.
And Andy, this works, the criminalisation policy, just like what they're trying to do to Gary Donnelly in Derry, where he's being harassed, arrested, and then released, and trying to say what he's involved is criminal activity, and that he's not a Republican.
Well, that's more or less it. What's also happening here is that the traditional, or what the papers would describe as mainstream Republican base, your provisional Sinn Féin supporters, there's a lot of rumblings of discontent in Sinn Féin, the provisional Sinn Féin. A lot of the people have been leaving. A lot of their elected representatives have gone. I think 50% of their elected representatives from Fermanagh alone have left the party. Places like Donegal, Belfast, there's people who aren't happy. They see the direction that Sinn Féin's gone in administering British rule, in supporting the RUC, PSNI, in not raising an eyelid about MI5 being in the north. So there's discontent there. These Republicans are looking to other Republican groupings for the answers. They're making tentative steps towards them. This sort of story basically is trying to blow that out of the water, saying that you can't go to these people. These people are loyalists, they're drug dealers, they're criminals. And there's definitely one eye cocked at those people to make sure that, our message isn't getting out there, and that more and more Republicans won't come on board, I think.
Well, this is definitely part of the MI5 plan now that they have their new building over in the 6 counties, is to discredit and make sure that nobody joins any Republican groups by printing stories like that and turning people off from joining any type of Republican organization.
Well, there's no doubt that that's the case. What MI5, it suits the British agenda in Ireland that provisional Sinn Féin are thought of as the Republican party. Now, provisional Sinn Féin, as you know now, are nothing more than a constitutional nationalist party. Well,
they're a British political party. I mean, they have seats in Westminster.
British rules. Some of their ministers are British ministers. There's no doubt that. But that being said, they do have a large support base that is still, in their heart of hearts, Republican. Now, you have to bear in mind too that there's a lot of spin in Ireland. There's a lot of misinformation in Ireland regarding what the position is. There's a lot of Sinn Féin's leading people, telling their people one thing but doing another thing publicly, but telling the people they have to do this publicly, but really there's a different agenda. And if you've been in the party for maybe 10, 15, 20 years, you'll believe what you're being told. So you can't say that their support base is pro-British. I don't believe that. But I believe that their leadership is certainly acting on a British agenda at present, and that it suits the likes of themselves and the SDLP to portray those who disagree with the Good Friday Agreement, with the British administration and Stormont, as somehow, criminally motivated, or, as if they have no grasp of politics at all.
Well, Andy, we're going to wind up here now. Thanks for coming on, and we'll be definitely staying on top of the story and trying to reveal what's going on and the coverage that Irish Republicans are getting in the 6 counties. So thanks for coming on.
Okay, John.
And you're listening